It's Tuesday, April 1st. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day. Truly a hell of a day to talk ball. And joining me to do just that is a first-time guest on the show, Tet Pizzuta. Dan, what's going on, buddy?
I'm doing well. I'm thrilled to be here. It's exciting. I think we've known each other online for a while. I met for the first time in person in Indianapolis. So it's fun to be here talking, just getting ready. This weird kind of month that we have while things are kind of happening, but not really. So we just have a little bit of time to be waiting for the draft to come.
Yeah, we're getting those like little trickle items of news out of the league meetings, the owner meeting, whatever we're calling them these days. We're like, all right, we're moving the touchback up to the 35-yard line. Or, Mike Tomlin's totally okay with Mason Rudolph going into the season as the starter when he's at the coach's breakfast, absolutely sweating bullets because I'm sure he definitely wasn't boozing the night before. So honestly, Dan, I would have to be boozing the night before to say something like, I'm okay with Mason Rudolph going into the season as the starter.
Yeah, that is something that, Aaron Rodgers, I guess, is eventually going to happen. But man, just to have to sit there and be like, this might be a thing that we have to do and say that with a straight face. Yeah, Mike Tomlin is a better, I guess, liar than I would be, because I would not be able to say that with a straight face.
No, I definitely would not. Yeah, I'd crack a smile at something along the way. Yeah, it is funny, the league meetings. We're not covering that on today's show, but we are going to talk about Mike Vrabel here in just a second. He had a great little opening line when he got to his media availability. Like, man, we had to come all the way to Florida just to talk to you guys, like who he's talking to all the time up in New England. But that actually transitions us well to exactly what we are talking about today. We are rolling on with our teams that shape the draft series. As Dan kind of alluded to, we're just trying to kill some time here before April's draft, and we got to talk about what some of these teams are planning to do. Today, we are looking at the wide receiver and running back needy teams. I'm loosely kind of framing these teams as the ones that are really looking to make a splash at the playmaker positions specifically. I've got a list of teams to go over. I do want to hear at the end of the show if Dan's got any that maybe I overlooked. So these are the teams, like I said, that are going to be probably making a splash at that playmaker position. Or if they don't, then we really got to talk about what a weak depth chart looks like for all of these offenses. Let's first get into the top segment here. Is the teams that are in the top 10. And there's three pretty obvious ones to me that we have not yet discussed on teams that shape the draft. And like I said, we got to start with Mike Vrabel's New England Patriots. Dan, obviously, I think we can begin this conversation with what's going on at pass catcher. I like the Stephon Diggs signing. I'm not sure how you felt about it, but that is not nearly enough when we're looking at a room that I guess if they walked into the season today, it would be like an 75% Stephon Diggs at wide receiver 1, and then, Pop Douglas, Kayshon Boutte, the guys they drafted last year competing for the second and third spots.
Yeah, I think what I do like about this Stephon Diggs signing, and I do like it, I think he'll be a good fit there, is it at least opens up more paths for them to fill out that receiver room. So without Diggs, I think they really would have been forced to really try something in the draft, whether they would have been ready to do it or not. But with Diggs now, I think it's certainly going to help him now. I think he was pigeonholed a little bit last year in Houston, like lining up in the slot a little more than he probably should, just because of the other wide receivers in that room to at least start the year. Before he got hurt, it was like 46% of his snaps were in the slot last year. It was just 27% the 3 years prior. So I think moving him more to the outside is certainly going to help. I think that helps out in, New England's offense to get Pop Douglas a little more in the slot. So I think you can now move around. You definitely have more options there, which I think is certainly going to help, even if he's only 75%. Having that type of guy in that room, I think, just opens up a lot of things, because if he wasn't there, that really, this is a receiving core that, I like Kendrick Bourne. I like Pop Douglas. Those are not the guys you want to be relying on in a year two of a quarterback like Drake May.
No, absolutely not. And yeah, I'm 100% with you about Stephon Diggs and like his pre-snap alignment, that I think him being it's been framed a little bit as like, oh yeah, he's in the transition point of his career where he's becoming that like crafty slot receiver type. And I don't disagree that he can do that and be pretty good in that role, but I don't think he has to be. Like, his skill set to me is still as a man coverage beating receiver, not to the degree that he was like in the reception perception era, Dan, like he still owns my top success rate versus man coverage score from the 2020 season that I've ever charted since 2014. Like he's not that player anymore, but he's still above the threshold of a guy that I think can play outside. In Houston, you have a true X receiver and you have like a vertical screaming outside flanker receiver in Tank Dell. You don't got any of those type of guys on this roster here in New England. So I think if he has to line up at X, and I don't think that's the best use for him, he's not going to be a vertical player, but he can still be like a late down separator for them. And I guess then the question is just, before we kind of think about what they could add, what do you think about the other guys on this roster? Like, what's your comfort level if they had to walk into the season with the Pop Douglases? Like, do you have any faith at all in a guy like Jalen Polk, who they drafted last year and had obviously an atrocious rookie season?
Yeah, Polk is really hard just because of how bad that season was. And it seemed like there wasn't really a lot of optimism that they had with him last year, where they were like even trying to like force it to happen. It just kind of seemed like, yeah, this guy's not working, so we're going to just kind of put this to the side for now and like deal with that later, which is certainly a tough thing when he like could potentially be one of those guys that you're counting on a little bit. You know, I've always been a big fan of Kendrick Bourne, so I think having him as like that kind of possession guy is going to work. Again, he probably shouldn't be like your number 2 option as he sits right now. I think Pop Douglas is fun. So I think if you go into that right now with like those 3 guys and, you know, including Diggs, it's going to be okay. But I would definitely want to add something to there, like get a little more of an explosive kind of option. I think even if it's not what they do, you know, in the top 10, I think something definitely does have to be added, probably, you know, day 2 at the latest.
And they have 2 third-round picks. I keep bringing that up with New England, so they can obviously add somebody in that mold. And you know, maybe we can kick around some ideas here in a second. But yeah, with Jalen Polk, it is so tough because I've said this a lot since he was drafted. At Washington, I liked him a lot as a prospect, as kind of a reliable, dirty work guy, good hands, good blocking. Well, his hands were terrible last season, and his blocking was like a net negative, which is it's so hard to wrap your mind around because it's so different than what he was as a prospect. I also think it's kind of like, we got to split the blame pie up a little bit. Like he has to, obviously, you don't have that type of rookie season if you're playing well. Like, I mean, again,
right.
the job is wide receiver. Like when the ball comes your way, even if it's a contested situation, you got to make more than 0 of those plays. And I feel like he made 0 of those plays. Like we got to be closer to 30% or something like that. Even that would be better than what we got last year. But I do think they kind of set him up to fail with some of the routes they had him running, a lot of vertical stuff. He's not a vertical receiver. They had him lining up a lot of X receiver. I don't think that's the right deployment level for him. But again, I think there's some overlap in what you'd want him to do and what Kendrick Bourne would theoretically do, what Stephon Diggs would theoretically do. That's what makes this such a hard room to figure out. Even if they go with these guys, like, are your X receiver options like Mac Hollins and Kayshon Boutte? I mean, Hollins is obviously kind of a meme, but he's a good role player. But we're stretching if like he's our every down X receiver, I think.
Yeah, that's kind of what this entire room feels like, even with Diggs a little bit, where it's a lot of role players that I do like for the roles that they play, but they shouldn't be the guys who are out there every down who you are, you know, running out in 11 personnel all the time, which it kind of feels like that's where they would be stuck with if they didn't sign Diggs, and 2, if they don't add something here in the draft at some point.
Yeah, what type of receiver, if you were to just you don't have to draw up like your dream receiver for Drake May, but theoretically, like it completes this room. This player works really well with Drake May. You don't need to even necessarily give me names, but if you have them, I'd love to hear them. What type of receiver do you want to see with a guy like Drake May?
Yeah, I think just something that can, you know, stretch the field a little more consistently. Like if to get into like a specific name, if Tet McMillan is someone who they think can be that outside guy, like again, he's not going to win with speed, but to be that trustworthy guy who can win on the outside. And, you know, I think that's why one of the reasons people are kind of down on this wide receiver class, because there's not a lot of just strictly outside guys who are going to win in that way. But, McMillan is one of them, and I think he could fit really well. And I think, kind of like you said, if you don't want Stephon Diggs to be that X receiver, all the time, he's not going to be that vertical threat. You can now move him around a little bit. So I think that's one of those where it opens up a lot of the options that you can have in deployment of some of those guys too. So I think, having a guy like Tet there, it would be super fun. We're just a guy who I think trustworthy, someone who I think can win some contested catches. I think Drake May would have some trust in there. And I just don't think there was that type of guy in that offense last year. I think we saw it kind of with Booties like sometimes. But like when he's that guy that you're relying on for the contested catches, that was certainly a tough thing to put on Drake May during his rookie year. But I think a guy like Tet would be a lot of fun in this offense.
Yeah, he threatens you vertically more so because of size and like contested ball ability than true speed. I mean, obviously, like I've said on the show, I think if Travis Hunter is there at 4, I'd turn in the pick and I'd make him a full-time wide receiver because absolutely. I think even though he's a more slender frame player, he basically played all X receiver and Colorado's offense, like all of his snaps on the line of scrimmage outside. Like I think he would give you that full field separator ability at X, but I do think like a big ball winner kind of, it's the basketball analogy, right? Like you want your receiver room to look like a basketball team. That would kind of work with this particular group if you have a big ball winner there. Because yeah, man, I mean, Kayshon Boutte, like I was not a fan of his coming into the NFL. I thought he was way too inconsistent of a player, and he was like on the roster bubble at times last year. Then he's just their top X receiver by the end of the season, and Drake May was willing to throw passes down the field into tight coverage to Kayshon Boutte. So yeah, if you just make that guy Tet McMillan, there's not, to me, I get lost when we get to like the next tier of X receivers. I think there's a huge drop off because I don't think guys like Luther, and I know you wrote a piece on the wide receiver draft class, so I'm curious if you kind of see it the same way. Luther Burden, Matthew Golden, like none of those guys are X receivers. They're kind of like move around players. Emeka Egbuka's like maybe not a slot only player, but he's that power slot type. We get down to like I don't even think Jaden Higgins is an X receiver, even though he's got the size for it. Like we get to like Trey Harris and Alec Aomanor from Stanford. And again, I think there's a big drop off there. So that might be if they're looking for like a second to third round, maybe even more of a third round option. That's kind of where those guys I think fit in.
Yeah, and I think that's the tough thing for a team like New England. Like I do like this receiver class in general of the quality of you can have like a bunch of these role guys who are going to fit into some teams and I think be productive as rookies. But if you're looking for like New England specifically and the type of receiver that they need that would really fill out that type of receiver room with what they have with the kind of receiver who I think would help Drake May the most. The options are very limited. But I'll agree with you that like if Travis Hunter is there, that's the pick. You should sprint up to that. Have him play receiver, work him in at corner a little bit because even you never know how long Carlton Davis has left, even though they signed him to a pretty big deal. Just the fact that what Hunter was able to do and like some of the metrics like I put together, and I know you just did reception perception on him and the entire thing was green, which is incredible. Like the fact that he hasn't really like played receiver to an extent where he has studied the position and has like worked full time there. And for him to be like just that good and that smooth is insane. I think with some more coaching and actual ability to and time put into that position, like I think he could be the best receiver in this class just because of how smooth, how athletic, how smart he is, and they just kind of add a little more juice to any receiver room like that. That would be a lot of fun too.
I also think a guy like Jalen Noel, who's probably like a slot player, but a vertical slot option, could be very similar to like what Drake May and Josh Downs did together at UNC. I mean, that was. Number one, obviously I'm a huge Josh Downs fan. I think there's still way more potential to mine from him. It's just probably not going to happen in the Danny Dimes, Anthony Richardson quarterback competition they got going on down there. But I mean, like those two guys were making money on these like intermediate, more so vertical slot plays. A guy like Noel could do that. And I mean, I even look at the slot because I think people think this is a very slot heavy receiver core, but like Pop Douglas is not a vertical slot guy. Like again, Jalen Polk, I think is more of a slot flanker type. So even that could be something that they get out of that position. Last thing before we move on from the Patriots here, Dan, it's worth noting that Mike Vrabel hasn't totally ruled out adding running backs. This is a team that paid Ramondre Stevenson last year and added Antonio Gibson in free agency. I just don't know how beholden the coaching staff is going to be to these guys. Obviously, Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper are the players on the depth chart for the tight end position. Again, I don't think there's a lot of commitment there. How surprised would you be if they make an addition at either of those two positions?
I mean, like you said, since they have, multiple, the day 2 picks, I wouldn't be surprised if they end up doing that. And I think this is probably the type of class where you could still have some decent quality there in the 3rd round if you want to use, one of those picks on a running back, because there's just so many guys in this class. So I wouldn't be surprised if they, come away with that and try to, reshape it a little bit, add a little more of a committee there. I think that's probably a good option for them at some point. And, if you're doing that the late day 2 or even day 3 for them, I think you could still be doing that, come away with a quality guy.
Yeah, the words of Dwayne McFarland on this show a couple of weeks ago, just talking about like when we were doing players were panicking on after free agency. He was like, everybody that from like a dynasty perspective has a running back that is not one of the guys at the position, you should be a little freaked out coming into this draft class. And I feel like Ramondre Stevenson is firmly in that zone of running back. They're like, and I think Vrabel, I'm kind of paraphrasing what he said here, but basically like, yeah, you could go to a season feeling actually not Mason Rudolph good, like actually good about Ramondre Stevenson as your starting back. But yeah, somebody in the 3rd round falls to you, like he could come in there and like be the RB2 on the depth chart by midpoint of the season, could Stevenson. So yeah, I like that call out of if someone in one of those 2 3rd round picks. We're just trying to help Drake May here. And I do think making this run game really, really good would obviously help the quarterback. Another team that's definitely looking to improve their run game is the Las Vegas Raiders. Dan, I think they basically got like a blank slate at running back and X receiver. Let's talk running backs first. This is a great draft class for running backs. Chip Kelly, the offensive coordinator, has got 2 guys in the draft. Those are obviously popular connections. How close do you think this Raiders run game is to being a potentially electric unit if they can get the right back?
So I think they could be close, but I'm not sure if this is the type of situation as constructed right now where like an Ashton Jeanty at 6 completely changes what they do, right? Because you just kind of look at what they were already doing last year. They were, one of the worst run blocking offensive lines in the league last year and didn't really get much better. I think still the right side of the line is definitely a question mark. And they were 22nd ESPN's run block win rate. They were tied for last yards before contact per rush. And I think if you throw a back like Jeanty in, you were thinking that he can do all the broken tackle things, but you would rather. We saw like with Saquon Barkley, the impact of the difference between what Barkley was doing, making that first guy miss at the line of scrimmage, opposed to making that guy miss 5 yards past the line of scrimmage. Right. And I think like that should be the lessons that we take away from the Saquon Barkleys and the Derrick Henrys being in those positions to really make a running back level up in offense. I'm struggling to see if throwing a running back here at 6 is what really does it for the Raiders, and especially with when we're back in Seattle with Geno Smith, the part of why he wasn't using a lot of play action and a lot of why they were asking him to do so many straight dropbacks and throwing so often was because they could not run it all because the offensive line couldn't run block. So I think that is still something that the Raiders need to be looking at a little more before they dive into running back. But if they are able to get something there somewhere in the draft. And then I think, I was doing a bunch of like mock draft simulations to kind of get this sense of what could be available. And some of my favorite things were like, you could like double up on running back too. Like take a guy, like one of the Ohio State guys in the second, get like a Jaden Blue or someone like that, later, where you can also have that pass catching running back to add to, where you can, because I think the Raiders have a couple of extra draft picks, I think in the 5th round. So that's something where I think that makes a little more sense for them for the running game specifically, because I wouldn't, I can see why they would want Jeanty, but I am concerned that this is not the type of scenario for a running back to jump right in and be successful right off the bat just because of how the line is structured right now.
No, I'm glad you've brought this up because obviously Jeanty to the Raiders, it felt like a few weeks ago became kind of like not a consensus mock draft pick, but a very, very popular one. And I think it's easy to make the connections. One, because we know they want to run the piss out of the ball, right? With Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly. Like they're going to want to have a good ground game there. Also because it's just the type of draft class where there's not a bunch of blue chip talent. So at some point, if you're just stacking your grades, you're taking lesser graded players than Ashton Jeanty. I mean, obviously we just did mock draft Monday with Chris Trapasso, and this was one of his favorite fits. So I'm glad we're getting kind of the other side of this here. And I guess as you're bringing this up, I'm a little surprised that, we don't see a lot more mock drafts with like Armand Membu, the right tackle from Mizzou, potentially, like, 'cause I agree with you, that right side of the line. I think this offensive line's okay. It's not one of the worst in the league, but, Dylan Parham, DJ Glaze, like, I think you could upgrade on either of those guys. And, even Will Campbell, if you wanted to kick him into guard, maybe like he's a guy that could be your right guard. And then again, Glaze, you could probably upgrade on with Membu, and then they could come back in the second round at 37 or the third round, 68. And take a running back and potentially even be a better rushing game than they would be with Ashton Jeanty and this current offensive line.
Yeah, I think that is it's strange to talk about Jeanty in this way because I think he is easily the best back in this class. But he's the best. It's not the best back in a class that doesn't have a lot of good running backs.
Sure.
Like this is the best back in probably the deepest running back class we've seen in years, which I think does change the formula a little bit when you are looking at how high a guy like that can go and how you could potentially situate yourself in a draft where you could potentially either grab an offensive lineman and a running back later in the draft, which I think is, something teams would want to do anyway. But I think especially in this class, I don't think the quality drop is going to be that high. And like you said, I think you could end up possibly having a better running game in total if you go in that direction, other than just trying to, throw Jeanty into what you're currently setting up right now.
Yeah, I mean, the lesson from last year and like seeing the success of Barkley and Derrick Henry and these guys, like it's not necessarily that, running back is back. I mean, I sort of kind of the run game, I think is the importance is higher now than it maybe was 5 years ago, just because of the way the league is trending and things of that nature. But it's not that, the running back's back. It's like, yeah, the running back can maximize an already great ecosystem. And I don't know that just hiring Chip Kelly immediately makes this go from one of the worst run games in the league to a great ecosystem. But I think we can push our way there with maybe another offensive line addition. And then, a running back. They have 3 6th-round picks. So even there, like I could see them doing the double up type of situation. Let's talk about their needed X receiver, though. Because like I said, I think that as much as they got a blank slate at running back, I mean, shoot, man, like Jacoby Myers is really good. He's obviously kind of a slot flanker hybrid. Brock Bowers is Brock Bowers. He's a tight end in name, but obviously he's kind of his own incredible thing. Right now, if they took the field today, I guess Trey Tucker would be their other outside receiver. I'm not okay with that, Dan. So, like, what can they do at that particular position as well?
This is another place where I think if Tet is there at 6, I would not be opposed to them taking him there. And I think that is another one where.
So do you view him as like a top 10 receiver, or is it more like in this class and with these particular teams?
I think I'm a little in between there.
Okay.
I think because of what he is able to do, because he is probably the one like actual X receiver, I would be okay taking him. And I think he does, would like him to maybe have a little more, long speed and be able to separate in that way. But I think he's still just really good. He gets open, which I think is going to. And I think in the 2 teams that we have been talking about with the Patriots and the Raiders, not only does he fit what they want to do, I think he fits well with the quarterback also. And I think going into a season with Tet, Jacoby Myers, and Brock Bowers, I can get behind that receiving trio. So the way I think Geno Smith would like that type of guy he could trust down the sideline, I think that would certainly open up some things for them in the passing game. And again, because you don't really have that many other options for receiver. And it's another thing where the ability to get a receiver of that quality and that type is just, it's non-existent right now. Like T. Higgins was supposed to be a free agent twice. It never hit the market. Like those guys, they're just not available. So I think sometimes for these guys, you also have to, I think, draft up a little bit just because the availability of them is it just doesn't happen. So I think for such a need that these two teams have with the quarterbacks and what they really need in that wide receiver class, I think that he's certainly going to be the type of player that I'd feel comfortable, in a top 10 type of pick for.
No, that's a really good way of framing it, because this year's free agency class, with a bunch of guys who are past their prime, and then even guys who might be, in really good spots, like Chris Godwin and Stephon Diggs, like coming off good years, coming off serious injuries. Like those are the type of guys who hit free agency. And obviously Godwin re-signed with the Bucs on like the opening minutes of the negotiating window. So I don't even know if you could truly say he was a free agent. Like that's what the wide receiver free agent market looks like. And I actually don't think that's going to change. I think that's what it's going to look like pretty much Dude, 2 years ago, I was charting like Alan Lazard and Corey Davis for like top free agents for reception perception. Like that's what the wide receiver free agent market looks like. So unless you're going to trade a first round pick plus for an established star because you got lucky, like the Titans were dumb enough to trade AJ Brown or, whatever, like that's what you have to do. And ultimately, like Tet, I think if he was in last year's draft class, like this is the way I would frame it. Like I think he'd be wide receiver 5, like behind the big 3 and Brian Thomas Jr. But I thought Thomas went too late in the first round. So like, again, this is a different class this year. And that's because of that, I think it's okay for teams like the Raiders or the Patriots or even the next team we're going to talk about to potentially consider him. But I like your point about Geno Smith, and this might be like the best quarterback pairing potentially for him, like from a year one impact perspective.
Yeah, I think so. And, I think you kind of need that too, because I think the worst thing, I think if you are the Raiders right now, is if you, one, are not fixing the offensive line, but also not giving Geno someone to throw to other than, Brock Bowers or Jacoby Myers. And you're not really expanding that receiver room. I think that puts them in kind of the worst case scenario when they're asking Geno to be dropping back. And I don't see how that's much different than some of the stuff he was doing in Seattle, where he's going to be asked to kind of bail them out by avoiding sacks. And we know he can do that. But if there's not going to be a lot of options down the field, then I think that is going to put a lot of pressure on the quarterback and probably is not how you really want to set up this offense.
Let's go to our next team and our last one here in the top 10, which is the Carolina Panthers. And the way I'd frame them, Dan, is that they're probably like an acceptable wide receiver room. They're probably an acceptable tight end room. Like, again, if they don't add to those positions and they have clear needs on defense. But at the same time, I think they could stand to upgrade at both of those positions. So are they a team potentially that could look at a Tet McMillan or maybe even a Tyler Warren in the top 10? Maybe that's aggressive, but I don't really know where you stand on Warren. But again, they certainly could stand to add at these two positions.
Yeah, I think they're definitely a team where I think it's going to be hard for them to pass up on defense just because we might see a few more offensive guys go before them, and they could throw anyone in on that defense and probably upgrade whatever spot they're going to. Point. So I would think they probably lean defense, but if they are a team that is looking for offense, I think this is a fun Tyler Warren spot. A place where, like you said, the receiver room is going to be okay. I was a Xavier Legette fan, coming into the draft. I thought he had a lot of fun things that you could potentially do. Didn't quite work out in year one, but I think there are still some ways he can be used. I was a big Jalen Coker fan. I think having him have a bigger role. So I'm okay with rolling into a year with those two and Adam Thielen, who was like back to being great as a slot receiver, especially in the back half of last season. I think adding someone like a Warren who you could move around all over the place, put him at quarterback sometimes, which he did at Penn State. Have him in the backfield, have him move all over the formation. I think that is something that really, again, one of those players that opens up what you can do on offense, just because all of these pieces can now move around. And when Bryce Young was going on that heater kind of in the back part of the season, it was because there were some more options down the field. Early on in the season, his first 2 starts and even the first couple starts back, he was throwing to running backs on like 22% of his throws, a lot of throws behind the line of scrimmage, just kind of like waiting for the check down because things weren't open. When he had the confidence that things were going to happen down the field, that dropped down to just 12% for running backs from week 12 on. So when he had the confidence, that's when we saw him starting to evade pressure better, have the ability to create a little more outside of structure. He was throwing down the field. I think his ADOT went up 1.5 yards. His average depth of completion went up 2.5 yards from week 12 on. And that's really what I think helped. And I think a guy like Tyler Warren, who is going to be able to kind of run the seams a little bit, could be the also work on screens and things like that. I think he just brings a lot of optionality to what you can do in that passing offense. And I think adding that weapon at tight end, which they don't really have, you have what Tommy Tremble and Sanders, they're, again, like you said, they're okay. But I think if you can have that Tyler Warren type piece that really opens up a lot of other options in that passing game, that could really help them kind of sustain what they had over the back half of the season last year.
It feels like they'll always be an intermediate over the middle heavy pass game with Bryce Young anyways, because I don't necessarily think they'll ever be like one of these teams that, Eagles style, like attack deep and outside the numbers. I think Bryce is a different type of quarterback, although he had some heaters on the outside that maybe weren't necessarily caught towards the end of last season. So I think Tyler Warren, though, ripping it up, vertical shots off play action, up the seams and things like that would make a lot of sense. Also, he's a good blocker. Like, that this team's going to want to run the ball a lot. Obviously, they invest in the offensive line. Chuba Hubbard's on a big extension. They bring in Rico Dowdle. I can see how he fits really well here. So I think that would be a really, I don't know, 8th overall is pretty maybe aggressive, but if they're like a trade down team, maybe I think they could stand to add some more picks. They're still sending a 2nd round pick to the damn Bears this year for the Bryce Young trade, which,
yeah, that's tough.
Dude, I was like a whole different person when that trade happened. Like when they're still paying that tax. It's unbelievable. But they do have another 2nd round pick because they have the Rams 2nd round pick from the Braden Fisk trade last year. So again, I think adding more draft capital, they might make sense as a trade down team. Just last point on the receiver, like I'm a fellow cokehead, big Jalen Coker guy. Absolutely. I'm like Thielen, I think was still good last year. Leggett, I think you do need to see a step from him. Dave Canales did say at the league meetings, I think it was yesterday or this morning, like we were okay not making the DK Metcalf trade because we have that guy in Xavier Leggett. Well, that's a bit of a projection, Dave. And like, by the way, like I really liked the way they used him early in the year when it was a lot of like off the line of scrimmage, backfield reps, things like that. Where do you see like his ideal usage? Because to me, I think the product diminished for Leggett the longer the season went, but I think a lot of that had to do with them deploying him more at X receiver after Deontay Johnson was kindly asked to leave town.
Yeah, I think he could potentially be that, but I think he just needs a little more refinement there and time, I think, to ramp up to that. Because like you said, he was playing a different role in the beginning of the season, and then you just kind of throw him out there and kind of hope it works, which didn't really click. So I think if he can go in slotted in that spot, into, the offseason workouts and training camp, I think there's a little more upside there for what he could potentially do. I do think he's probably still going to be, more of a lower ADOT yard after the catch type of guy. So I think you can, split the difference a little bit between how he was used in the two ways and kind of hope that some of the outside X stuff does click a little more in year 2 if he's actually, projected to be that role. But I also think, you could add to this receiving room. I just don't think they're a team that necessarily has to do it early in the draft. I think there, could be some, day 3 guys who might, stretch the field a little bit. That could certainly help this receiving core. But I think with the 3 guys you have now, it's not an immediate need, which I think it helps and certainly is much different than the 2 teams we talked about earlier.
Yeah, even if they just get like a sacrificial X receiver type in here to just clear space out to let Leggett do yards after catch stuff, Coker do some big slot receiver stuff, Thielen do big slot receiver stuff. I think that's probably a better use of resources than maybe like Tet McMillan at the 8th overall pick. But I'm glad you said that about Leggett because it's so much harder to just switch midstream than we think. Like Oh yeah, I mean, because think about like, oh, Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, they got to move him around more. Well, they were basically practicing with him just doing that. It's like that's probably a year 2 thing for him. And I think for Leggett, they actually did try to switch things midstream, and like we said, the results were maybe a little bit mixed. We're going to take our first break. When we come back, we'll talk through 2 teams that are a little bit higher in the draft order right after this. All right, we're back. Dan, let's talk about the Dallas Cowboys. There has been plenty of buzz about the Cowboys targeting a wide receiver 2, so much to the point that even Stephen Jones, obviously Jerry Jones' son, we've talked about it at the league meeting. It's like, producer Colin, who's a Cowboys fan, sent me this quote that, Stephen gave to our own Jory Epstein, who used to cover the Cowboys, is pretty plugged in there. And my response to Colin was, oh, good to know Steven's got 2 eyeballs and a brain. Like, anybody can see they need a wide receiver 2 on this team. So I do think this is a position that Dallas could potentially think about taking at 12th overall. But again, before we talk maybe some of these specific prospects, or you can take it that direction, what type of receiver does Dallas need?
Yeah, I think they just need someone who can, stretch the fields a little bit. That's really been the issue with Dallas, for the past couple years, where the juice just, is not there to push it vertically. And I think, they had it with the Amari Cooper a little bit. And then after that, they just haven't been able to find that guy. Like Jalen Tolbert's fun, but not really the guy you're going to, rely on to do that. Kevontae Turbin's more of a, gadget type of guy. Just Brandon Cooks was, Brandon Cooks was not, Brandon Cooks of. He's finally the age now where it felt like he was like 5 years ago, because he was just like around forever. So I think they just really lacked juice on the outside, someone who can stretch it. And this feels like the Matthew Golden dream scenario if you're the Cowboys, just because there's debate whether he plays to like his 4.2 speed. I don't care. Like, he is explosive and gets open. If he runs a 4.2 or like a 4.4, it doesn't really matter to me. I think he has the ability and kind of route running smoothness to get open and be explosive on the outside. 28.2% of his plays went for 20 or more yards last year. That was the second most among all college receivers, not just in this draft class. And I think he can still be more of an outside threat than he really was used at Texas too. So I still think there's also some explosive upside. So I think he is that dream type of receiver for Dallas. And I think that's the type of guy that they need. Someone who can line up on the outside, but you can move him around a little bit, allow CeeDee Lamb to play more in the slot when he can. And then, you just have that kind of just downfield threat, which they just haven't been able to find consistently in Dallas. Everything for the past couple of years is so condensed. Slants to CeeDee Lamb are awesome. When you're exclusively running slants to CeeDee Lamb, that is not what you want to be doing.
Yeah, Michael Gallup has since gone to the Raiders, retired, and is now signed with the Commanders. That's how long it's been since they've had somebody, and he wasn't even in the prime of his career. This last couple, he was obviously diminished version of himself his last couple of years in Dallas. That was their last downfield threat, was contested passes down the sideline to Michael Gallup. It's been a minute since those were effective plays for the Dallas Cowboys. So I agree with you, just stretching the field out here. And Golden's interesting because when I wrote him up, number one, he's awesome against zone coverage. Just gobs of separation on these big in-breaking routes, which to me, I felt oh man, one of these McVay teams that wants to run these shots off play action, big in-breakers and things like that. I think you feel his speed more so, Dan, when he's running these in cuts and stuff like that, as opposed to just running go routes on the boundary. That's not really the type of player he is. One of these McVay tree guys are going to just love Matthew Golden running those routes, the principal routes in that offense. Brian Schottenheimer's not necessarily that guy, but I do think they want to up the play action rate. I do think they want to stretch the field a little bit more. He would fit in that regard. And I do think he is, I don't know, maybe you disagree with me. I think his ceiling is as a very, very good number 2 receiver is Matthew Golden. This is one of those spots where all they're really looking for is a very, very good number 2 receiver.
Yeah, I mean, I like him a lot, but yeah, like you said, you probably wouldn't want him to be the type of guy who is the like alpha number one in a receiving class. But if you are a team like the Cowboys and you have CeeDee Lamb, who is going to be that target hog, you can have, Matthew Golden out on the outside doing some of the other things while Lamb can, work more on the inside and still move some guys around, because I think you can, Brian Schottenheimer was talking about how, they want to use some more motion and things. He was at least saying the right things in his introductory press conference, and not necessarily things that had been in Dallas while he was the coordinator under Mike McCarthy. But if you can do that, then I think, again, it's another player that opens up some things. And I think Lamb and Golden is a very fun receiver duo that I think then allows you to do some other things with whatever, the tight ends or the third receiver is going to be too.
And Matthew Golden and Jalen Knowles, another one that when I watched them, I was like, they're going to just be instant impact players on these like full speed motion plays that teams are running now, like motion at the snap. Golden, and like I said, Knowles probably like the day two guy. I don't know. I really like Jalen Knowles, but Matthew Golden, I think would be a natural fit there as well. Again, full speed, get him like put him next to CeeDee Lamb. Like CeeDee Lamb's your on ball slot player, and you move Matthew Golden. Like you're creating a lot of mismatches there. So even if I don't have it ranked like he's my number one receiver in the class or anything, I think this is one of those landing spots for him where I think he would be an immediate impact player, NFL fantasy wise. Like, and then, Jalen Tolbert's like a fine wide receiver 3. So when you go to 11 personnel, like Jalen Tolbert can kind of be your on ball sacrificial X receiver type. And I think that's fine. Like every now and again, he's a lot more useful as a 5 target player than a 8 to 10, which he pushed at times last year. They did trade a 4th round pick for Jonathan Mingo, so that's still like he's still on the team. I guess he's like a gadgety guy for them. That's probably the best use for him. But like Golden here, I think would really bring this room together. But let's talk about running backs, man, because there's no shot they go into this season with Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders. I don't think that's in the cards. And like I said, they don't have a 4th round pick, but they have the 44th and the 76th overall selection to potentially take a stab in this class at running back.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if they try to do that. This offensive line surprisingly was 5th in run block win rate. But again, you lose Zach Martin, but I think this is one of those where I think a day 2 pick for them makes more sense than, I could see them trying to make the splash when, like if a Jeanty is there, like that would be the most Jerry Jones move possible.
Of course.
But I think if you, again, because this class is just so deep, I think if you add something, to that running back room in the 2nd round, I think that certainly opens up a lot of what you can do. I think that'll improve the running back room regardless, and you don't have to be making that big swing in the 1st round for them.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. You can find a starting back in this class in that range. And if that guy comes into camp and he just can't play, you could get away with like a disgusting Javonte Miles Sanders sort of committee or whatever. But I think, you're insulated enough that you don't have to force it. But I do think at some point here, we'll see them add to the running back position. Another team that's definitely adding to the running back position is the Denver Broncos. And I mean, they are a while ago, I thought they would be a great team to potentially even trade up for Ashton Jeanty just because they have such a big hole there at running back. And I know Sean Payton loves Ashton Jeanty. So I don't know. I kind of think they're blank slate at running back and tight end, Dan.
Yeah, this is going to be kind of the opposite of what I said about a lot of other teams, where I think they are the type of offense right now that can be situated to plug in a running back into what they currently have, and that is going to elevate what they're able to do in the run game. This was arguably the best offensive line in the league last year. They were 1st in pass block win rate and run block win rate. They just weren't able to generate explosives at all because they just didn't have the juice in the backfield. They were 19th in explosive rush rate on running back runs, only 4 runs of 20 or more yards, which ranked 27. That was from running backs. And, Bo Nix had a couple, but there just wasn't any production coming from the running backs while they were so good at blocking. And I think it really was a waste of some of that offensive line in the run game. So if this ends up being like a Omarion Hampton team where, if Jeanty goes somewhere before 20, I think if Jeanty is here in 20, that's a fine pick that I'm okay with them making. I think you can, talk yourself into Hampton being the second first round back to go. Just because of their situation. Hampton only averaged 1.5 yards before contact per rush last year. So of the 31 backs that I've looked at, that was 27th, and he was 6th in yards after contact per rush. So this is a guy who I think has that ability to be that broken tackle type of explosive runner. And if you again, kind of like we talked about earlier, you're taking those broken tackles, not going from the line of scrimmage, but having make that first guy miss 5 yards past the line of scrimmage. That certainly, I think, is going to open up an explosive run game that I think Denver just didn't really have a lot. They were successful because on early down runs, just because the offensive line was blocking for them. But I think just adding that explosive element is something that was really missing in that offense last year.
Yeah, anything with Denver, you got to cut out quarterback runs to get a good glimpse of this, but I've brought this stat up a lot. They were 11th in yards before contact per running back rush last year. So Omarion Hampton would be way, that's a night and day sort of transition there, but they were I think bottom 8 in yards after contact per attempt from their running back. So it's like a kind of a pretty perfect marriage. As much as I think the Jeanty trade up is exciting, and Sean Payton's never shied away from giving away draft picks to go get guys that he likes. They even traded up for his first pick with the Denver Broncos, Marvin Mims. So again, those trade ups are not out of the question here. But I think if they stuck at 20 and just took Hampton, man, he would be the locked in 1.02 in dynasty rookie drafts. Even if you are a big Travis Hunter bro, like I am, I think Hampton would still be the best pick there at your second overall pick in dynasty rookie drafts. And this is such a slam dunk spot. Tight end wise, again, I think they could use some help there. And even what's your sense on their wide receiver room? Do you think they're fine with the guys that are kind of in Cortland Sutton's orbit? It's also worth noting that Sutton probably needs a new contract, and I don't really know if they want to give it to him.
Yeah, I think they're okay. And again, it's not something where I think they would have to force something at 20, but I'm okay with adding something to this room at some point. I like Marvin Mims a lot, and I think kind of expanding on what he can do will, I think, be helpful. Where I think they had him a little bit in kind of the gadget screen stuff, and that was so important to what they were doing in the second half of the season anyway, when they kind of figured out that was just the best way to run this offense, was get the ball out quicker. Bo Nix, from week 11 on, his ADOT dropped 2 yards because they were still throwing downfield. I know Denver fans are going to get very mad because he had a lot of downfield throws, but that was not how the offense was structured. It was because they were getting the ball out so quickly and getting a lot of those screens working, and that eventually opened up a lot of those deep shots, which did work. But so much of that second half of the offense figuring out what works because it was getting the ball out quickly into that short area of the field. And if that's a Trey Harris, maybe that's fun in the second round. That type of guy who could fit there. But yeah, I would definitely add something. But it's not something where I think it's a screaming need. Again, some of the other teams we talked about.
Yeah, and I keep saying they are blank slated tight end. I'm thinking about inline tight ends. Obviously they have Evan Ingram, who's basically, I don't know if he's their Joker. He tweeted out a Joker gif, so he's at least leaning into the bit there. But he's definitely a guy that plays all over. He's played some out wide, he plays big slot, stuff like that. He's even had 16 career rush attempts. So I think they'll do a little bit of everything with him, which to me, maybe they'll do the Adam Troutman thing for the 100th year of Sean Payton's career. I guess that they can do that as the inline player. But I think, again, somewhere they see a guy who's more of that true inline tight end, they could go that direction. But I like your points about Marvin Mims, because man, his rookie year was a disaster, I think, from a route running perspective, but they found the right kind of buttons to push with him as sort of that gadget player, shots down the field, basically just no fat in the middle, just all up top or all down low. That's it with Marvin Mims. But maybe if there's a more development there, I liked him as a prospect, so I could see that happening. But yeah, they have very hyper specific role players at the wide receiver position. Even Cortland Sutton's a good starting X receiver, but he's mostly good like in tight coverage or on in-breaking routes. So he's probably their most versatile player, but Mims has a defined role. Vele is like a big slot receiver. Troy Franklin's like a stretch, skinny receiver. Like they have these very hyper-specific role players. So it'll be telling, Dan, I think, if we see them grab another one of those types or someone who could do a little bit more of everything.
Yeah, and I think if you're looking even, the late of the day 3 guys, like there are guys who were like deep threats, like an Arian Smith from Georgia, who I do like a lot, has that speed, hasn't completely figured it out as a wide receiver, but had like a lot of production relative to what the Georgia offense was producing last year. So adding just a guy like that who can stretch the field again, I think like those are the types of players that I think would help Denver a lot too, because I think again they were condensed in a sense, but I think that was a little bit by design. But I think now that they have that situated, I think this year we'll see them build that out a little more, have a little more purposeful verticality baked into this offense. And I think, getting a speed guy like that could certainly help.
Some like weird project receiver, like a Jalen Lane from Virginia Tech, like a lot of athleticism, not a lot of like refinement. What's his position type? I could totally see that. I just keep coming back to this Broncos team as one of the better like sleeper ecosystems, right? Just because I think they have a quarterback in Bo Nix, and you can kind of debate how good was his rookie year or whatever, but I think he's a guy, like he's a starter. He gives them a lot of what they want to take these deeper shots and just be I like Bo Nix. So like I don't want to say like I don't want to sound like I don't like him. I do like him. They have drop a running back in here and they're immediately like maybe an ecosystem elevator. They have plenty of options at pass catcher. Like I think this team could be, I don't know, maybe not an elite offense next year, but one that really takes the jump in 2025.
Yeah, I think so. And in not a manufactured way, which I think they kind of were the second half of last year. That was a very productive offense over the second half. There were some really good games. But again, a lot of it was, Bo Nix had like a 2-yard ADOT on some of those. I think the Cincinnati game maybe, where they were just like going back and forth. But it was like up until the fourth quarter, he had like a 3-yard ADOT. Like but I think like that was purposeful, and that's a good way to get that type of quarterback adjusted into this system. I think we'll see more, intentional, pushing the ball down the field and opening some things up, I think, in 2025. So I do think this has the potential to be a very efficient offense, and just adding a couple pieces. I think they are like certainly just, maybe a piece or two away from really clicking in a meaningful way.
All right, we're going to take our final break, and then we come back. We'll talk through some other teams that can maybe make a splash, maybe some that I overlooked right after this. All right, let's land this plane here. I want to throw some, before I ask you, Dan, about some teams that maybe I overlooked, I just want to throw out 3 that we discussed on last week's quarterback needy episode: the Titans, the Browns, and the Saints. I don't want to expand too much on the Saints because we have one more episode that's coming up in this series where we actually going to talk. Spoiler alert, it's the teams we can't quite figure out, and I think like that should just be the New Orleans Saints. Yes. I don't even think they've got it figured out. So
an evergreen topic for the New Orleans Saints. Yes.
What are the New Orleans Saints and what are they doing? And I feel like this version of it is the most what are they doing team of the Saints, like this long history. But so I don't want to dial too much in on them, but I definitely think Titans and Browns, those are 2 teams that also could be looking for playmakers to go along with potentially young quarterbacks that they may or may not. Well, the Browns may or may not take one. The Titans obviously are gonna.
Yeah, I think the Titans are interesting because I know I've heard you talk about it. Like Calvin Ridley is a good receiver, kind of ends up being miscast as this, outside X that should be the number one guy in an offense. And I think, the Titans are a sneaky situation where I think they are set up pretty well structure-wise for a quarterback. I think I like a lot of what they did along the offensive line. I think if you add Cam Ward there, that is the type of player who's also, pretty good at avoiding sacks under pressure. So I think his pocket movement is going to be a plus. You have Ridley, which I think is going to help. I would like to see definitely something added into that receiver room. I think just, adding some more downfield types of threats would certainly help. it could also be a tight end too. This is we talked about, the receiver class, how deep and useful some of these players are going to be. It's the same thing at tight end. Like Tyler Warren is very good. Colson Loveland is very good. I think when you even get to, day 2, you're still going to have guys who I think because now, in going into the NFL, we have offensive coaches who I think are more open to playing to some of these players' strengths instead of being like, you're a tight end, my tight end does this. I think there's less of that. So I think we will see some more of these, second, third round tight ends be able to produce as rookies when that used to be, and still is, one of those positions that needed a longer run of development time where we didn't often see a lot of rookies, just hit the ground running year one. I think we will see that a little bit. So if Tennessee adds, a tight end like maybe a Harold Fannin Jr. would be kind of fun.
Sure.
There's Elijah Arroyo. I think if you double up with that, bring Cam Ward's tight end with him, I think that would be fun too. Like there are certainly ways you can be adding to that passing game. And I think, again, that's something where they'll be able to do that later in the draft and still get a meaningful role player because I think this draft, both at wide receiver and tight end, has a lot of them, as you're getting into, day 2 and even early day 3.
If they don't have a third round, I was like, where did that third round pick go? They don't have a third rounder this year, but they pick 35th overall. They pick at the top of the 4th round. They obviously they have 2 picks in the 4th round. Because I think they have one from the Ernest Jones trade from the Seahawks at 120 overall, 141. So top of the 5th round, 2 picks in the 5th round. So they don't have that third rounder, but they've got some extra picks on day 3 to play with if they want to move around the board. I love the Arroyo call. That would be really great. Just get Cam Ward's college teammate in there because you got a tight end in name in Chigo Okonkwo, but you don't have like a proven starter, like maybe more of an inline guy. And I don't know. I've said this a lot, but I am very fascinated with the idea of, Brian Callahan comes from the Bengals. They took Joe Burrow at the top of the draft. They take T. Higgins at the top of the 2nd round. At the 35th overall pick, they're a team that could, I think, add like a big bodied wide out there, a Trey Harris type or something like that. Again, I'm not sure who I'd want that player to be, but somebody that could maybe do that X receiver stuff to not allow Calvin Ridley to be kind of pigeonholed in that position. So yeah, like a Trey Harris, maybe, I don't know if I'd love A.O. Manor at the top of the 2nd round, but like one of those types at that particular position. That to me, Dan, I've said this a lot, but that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I'd definitely be open to that too. I think once you commit to the Cam Ward path, which you are doing right now, and you're on that rookie quarterback, evolution there, I think you should be doing whatever you can now to be making things as easy as possible for that quarterback. So I think getting him number 1, adding to, because the offensive line is already in place too. You're already in a situation where you probably have a better offensive line to put him behind than I think most teams who would be picking number 1 would. So that's not really a concern there. So I think when you are trying to build out his environment, pass catcher is going to be the next thing. So yeah, using that top of the 2nd one, which I think is going to be, a bit of a sweet spot. Like you said, I don't know exactly who I want there, but I think there are going to be multiple guys who can be productive pieces to that offense who are going to be available in the top of the 2nd round.
Yeah, just hammer offense, man. That's what I would do if I was Tennessee. Cleveland, they actually have some pretty decent sized problems on offense. Like Kirk Cousins spotted at a Cleveland Chipotle. Like I think we all just know that that's going to happen at some point. I think Kirk probably, people forget how much leverage Kirk has in this situation because he has a damn no trade clause. So he can just sit there and be like, yeah, you're going to keep me on the roster till my bonus clears. You're going to keep me on the roster till after the draft so I can not get, jumped by a rookie quarterback like you guys did to me last year, Atlanta. So I feel like that trade is going to happen sometime on the 3rd day of the NFL draft. Kirk Cousins will become a Brown. And it's just like, okay, how do we feel about a Browns offense that is Kirk Cousins, no running back, like Jerry Jeudy's your wide receiver 1. Cedric Tillman had moments, but I like Tillman, but I'm not sure how I feel about that. The offensive line has pretty big questions. So they're definitely a team that I think running back and wide receiver, we could see them pick both of those positions at some point this year.
Yeah, absolutely. They're so interesting because I I never know what they really like at wide receiver. It's just kind of all over the place.
Bad.
I know,
like they don't like they like they like Anthony Schwartz and David Bell, which is like so different, but neither is good.
Right. That's the other thing. It seems like the type of receivers they like are just the types that I don't like. Like I think you agree, never been a huge Judy guy. And so for that to be your like a real big swing at a wide receiver to this point, I don't know. But again, because like they don't have a lot of quality there, I think anything they bring in probably could help. Like I could see them bringing in Travis Hunter at 2 potentially, and having him play offense a little bit. I wouldn't be opposed to that. Like Travis Hunter is just, I think we're underrating how good Travis Hunter is as a prospect. Yeah. To be so good at corner, and again to be so good at wide receiver without really refining the position at all. So if he goes 2, I wouldn't be surprised there, and I think the Browns would probably get some offense out of him in that way. But yeah, because this is kind of so barren along the offense, I think pretty much anyone they add going the second round and beyond would not be a shock.
Any other teams that I may have overlooked here? Some definitely might be on the next episode of this series, things like that. But any other teams that stand out to you, Dan, as like ones that are really looking for help at the playmaker spot?
So I'm interested in what the Steelers end up doing at their pick, because you have these 2 outside guys who are just going to be running the go routes all the time. And I think if you fit that with Aaron Rodgers, who I think led all quarterbacks in go routes thrown last year, some of them to steal from Nate Tice were performative go routes.
2022, was it that his final year in Green Bay, a lot of performative go balls.
Yeah, so I think that's something that he just still wants to do. But again, it's also part of his game. If you see a one-on-one on the outside, he gives the little hand signal and you're just running straight, which I think is going to work fine for, Metcalf and Pickens. But 1, Pickens might not be on this team. And 2, if he is, he only has 1 year left on his deal. Is that someone that they're trying to re-sign? So if, this could be like an Emeka Ibuka type of place where I think they could use that type of slot receiver to work the middle of the field. They don't run 11 personnel a lot, so I don't know how, but it's still like 56% of the plays, still over half the plays where you have 3 wide receivers on the field. I think having him in the slot would also help the run game for Arthur Smith, which you want to do. And I think have someone just in that middle of the field to be able to kind of open up that area along with Freiermuth when you just have, these 2 vertical type of players on the outside. I think that's a good complement to what they have. And I'm interested to see if that's something they're thinking of, thinking ahead to, especially with, figuring out what the future of George Pickens is on the roster too.
Yeah. And if you're a fan, you're just trying to tuning into the draft and stuff like that, and you're like, because I think I've seen people ask this, like, why is Luther Burden falling out of the first round of mock drafts and guys like Matthew Golden rising up the ranks, Emeka Ibuka kind of holding strong as potential first rounder? By all accounts, everybody I talk to, like, Ibuka and Matthew Golden are just like A+ character guys. Like they're hard workers, they're great teammates, they're not selfish. And I mean, Ibuka, you can see not selfish on his film because he's like a great blocker and he's a dirty work guy. And I just feel like the Steelers they've become this like house of wayward wide receivers and stuff like that. And I think they probably about hit the limit on it, which is why I've been theorizing all along that they are trading George Pickens this offseason. And I like Metcalf, I don't know, Dan, like he gets grouped into that, like he, like personality or whatever. That guy is another dude that works his ass off, like wants to be great, all this stuff. So like I think he's at UCLA running routes and catching passes with Aaron Rodgers like already, which is just sign the damn deal already. Let's get it over with so we can really talk about it. We can run news stories on it and all that stuff. But yeah, like that guy's dialed in. He's working hard. And I think like getting another hardworking player in the mix like Ibuka would make total sense to me. And again, like Arthur Smith wants to run the ball. This is a team that needs to add a running back, I think, at some point. Like, let's get a grinder blocking receiver here and let's go to work.
Yeah, I think that's certainly something. Like, I don't know if they feel that strongly that they would do it in the first round, but I think if they are thinking that way, that's a fit that just makes a ton of sense to me.
Yeah, a couple other teams I'll throw out that we don't have to expand on here because we're talking actually about them in the next episode of the series. Texans, Chargers, Packers receivers a little bit. Yeah, like all those teams would maybe have fit, but again, they're coming up on our next episode. But that is going to do it for this one. Dan, appreciate you doing this, buddy. Tell the people, I know your time with the 33rd team is just ended, right? You filed your last piece with them. So what's next? Like, what do you got working on as we head into the NFL draft?
That's a great question. And
not to ask you the hardest question here at the end of the show, but I know you've got some things cooking. So
yeah, we're playing around with some stuff. Anything you see is going to be on some socials. So hanging out in Blue Sky mostly. It's still on Twitter. Dan Pizzuta on everything. It's very easy with a very unique name where I'm the only Dan Pizzuta. So if you're searching somewhere, that works, and I'll be popping up where I can to be heading into draft season, still making sure I'm getting some stuff out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Make sure you're following Dan on Blue Sky, and all across socials. Yeah. You're great. You got a good name that just like stands out. Matt Harmon, dude. There's a Matt Harmon defensive end of the draft. I figured this out the other day because his RAS was going around, and I was like, I just want to say for the record, this guy is not me. He's 6'5". I'm shy of 6'5". But in terms of the weight, I might be a bit bigger than this defensive end. So that is not me, but Matt Harmon is a rather common name. So you've got that as a leg up in the media game on me, man.
Yeah, it is the one, I guess, nice thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm hoping we see more and more of you, Dan, here very shortly because you're very good at this, and this episode obviously proved that. That is going to do it for today's show. On Thursday, we are going to continue our draft deep dive series with Charles McDonald with part 2 of the running back class. Yes, as I said, it is so deep this year, we're going to do a little double dip at that position. So that will be out on Thursday. Until then, we are out.